Hello, Year 11. Just going to quickly whiz through the answers to Wednesday's lesson. Our early atmosphere and the evolution of the atmosphere. I put both lessons together, so you only had to log in once. So well done to those of you that did log in. You gave it a good go. I was very impressed with your effort. So what you needed to do was work through the presentation, make notes on the paper, your pen and paper, as you go through the slides. So as you went through, you should have been making notes of things that you learned. I did give you the page reference for both revision guides. So if you had the foundation tier or the higher tier, you should have been able to find the right page. And I did say, if you're not planning on taking higher tier, then you could skip the higher tier questions. But I was very impressed with the number of you that tried to do those. Okay, so we began with a little quick quiz to recap the previous lesson on the composition of the atmosphere. So today, the atmosphere is mainly nitrogen. The proportion of carbon dioxide is less than 1%. The process of respiration releases carbon dioxide. The process of combustion also releases carbon dioxide. And the process of photosynthesis takes in carbon dioxide. Okay, and then we moved on to some reading. So if you read the information on the slides, the answers to most of the questions are actually there. So this second paragraph says, it's a story that spans approximately 4.6 billion years. And then the question was, how old is the Earth approximately? So you should have chosen 4.6 billion years. Theories about the change in our atmosphere. So it talks in the second paragraph here about for the first billion years, intense volcanic activity released gases in a process called degassing. And the question says, what do we call the release of gases? So you should have chosen degassing. Okay, this one was a little bit harder, so you should have referred to your revision guide to double check this fact. But which gas was not present in the early atmosphere? It was oxygen. Why was there no oxygen? Because there were no green plants or algae yet, and that meant that there was no photosynthesis which produced that oxygen. The Earth started to cool, and as that happened, water vapor is a gas, so water condensed to form the oceans. And when the oceans formed, a lot of carbon dioxide dissolved into the water and was used to make carbonates, things like seashells and stuff like that. So why did the carbon dioxide levels first start to drop? Because oceans formed and carbon dioxide was dissolved in the water. Okay, what evidence do we have for these changes in our atmosphere? One set of evidence is obtained by measuring carbon-boron isotope ratios. So they'll take they'll dig up the ocean floor and they will measure the amount of radiation that is coming out of different layers of it. And they can use that to work out how long the rocks or the elements or the atoms have been decaying. And then they can use that information to work out how old the rocks might be. Okay, but why can we not be 100% certain for our theories? There's no direct evidence. There was no scientists around all those years ago, so there's no actual physical evidence from that time. Suggests why scientists use the composition of gases given off by volcanoes. So scientists have made an assumption that the same proportion of gases being given out by volcanoes now are the same as billions of years ago. So they're making the assumption that volcanoes haven't changed in the last billion years. Whether this is right or not remains to be argued among scientists till this day. A possible disadvantage of using indirect evidence is that it's unreliable. It's based on impressions and opinions, both of which can change over time and with additional experience. So you can have your opinion swayed by other things. If you have direct evidence, it's harder to dispute the facts. So evaluating the evidence, no one was around to record the conditions 4.6 billion years ago. Proxy evidence is being collected. So we can look at things like counting the number of stomata and fossilized ferns, tells us about the carbon dioxide level. Evidence from direct measurements should give more reliable data, but there's not always agreement. Like I say, scientists weren't around 4.6 billion years ago. So scientists will publish their findings. Why do they do this? They publish it so it can be checked and it can be compared with other data. Oxygen increased. So about 3.5 billion years ago, the first life appeared on Earth. The first life forms could live anaerobically without oxygen. And then over time, evolution happened and aerobic life forms started to exist. So the question is, explain the difference between living anaerobically and living aerobically. Lots of people only wrote the definition of one, which was in the text, but you had to deduce, or you had to use your knowledge to work out the second one as well. So anaerobic without oxygen, aerobic with oxygen. Photosynthesis was kind of the first process to produce this oxygen that was really, really important to the evolution of organisms. So this process used up carbon dioxide and it releases oxygen. But what is the other product? So if you ever need to know the product, you just look at the word equation and you see what's being produced, and you can see if it's not oxygen, they've asked you that in the question, what else is being produced? It is glucose. Now, higher tier people. Oxygen was first removed. So even though these plants had evolved and they had started the process of photosynthesis, for quite a long while it didn't look like oxygen levels were increasing. And this is because the first lot of oxygen that was being produced all reacted with iron to form iron oxide. You can see this in the photo. There's some banding, some rusty coloured rocks. And that is where those first lots of oxygen went. Okay, so there was a lag. There was initially oxygen was used for something else and not for living things to respire with. This is a theory based on evidence which can be interpreted in different ways. So one piece of evidence that scientists have used is the presence of a microbial mat. They are present in fossil records from 3,500 million years ago, but are still present and can produce thin layers of oxygenated water under ice. These microbes do not die in an oxygenated environment during the ice ages. So basically what scientists have done is they've taken ice cores, they've taken large slivers of ice out, and they've looked at where there's kind of bubbles and what gas would have been in them and things like that. But why is this evidence considered indirect evidence? There are no measurements from the actual time period. So they're taking samples now and looking back 3,500 million years ago, not taking measurements from the actual time period. Now, everyone should have had a go at this one. Carbon dioxide levels decreased. So as these algae and plants started their photosynthesis, they used up a lot of the carbon dioxide, and that meant that the carbon dioxide levels were decreasing. Plants also were involved in forming fossil fuels. So plants that die and get buried form coal. Dead sea creatures that die and get buried, they usually form oil and gas. So it says in the question, other than the formation of fossil fuels, how else do plants remove carbon dioxide? The answer was photosynthesis. Okay, limestone sediments. So you might remember a few slides ago, we talked about carbon dioxide dissolving in oceans or in seas. And what happens then is that microscopic animals or marine organisms will take some of that carbon dioxide that's dissolved and react it with calcium to make calcium carbonate. This means that they are forming their shells out of quite firm, the same as limestone really, quite stiff and protective material. So explain why plants were essential for early animal life to flourish. The most important thing that plants did was producing oxygen from photosynthesis. Higher tier, looking for a pattern. Stomata are openings that allow gas exchange in plants. Predict the relationship between the number of stomata and the atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. So if there's not very much carbon dioxide, you will adapt to produce more holes so you can take more carbon dioxide in at the same time. So if we're looking back at imprints or at fossilized leaves, we would expect that if there's more stomata, it was a time period with less carbon dioxide. And that if there's less stomata, there would be more carbon dioxide. So very, very, very ancient plants would have less stomata than the modern plants that we have now, where there is less carbon dioxide. Right, match each process with the correct description. So photosynthesis, you can see, is the use of carbon dioxide to make sugars like glucose. Respiration is the release of carbon dioxide from organic molecules such as glucose. So they're opposite equations, if you remember. Same four chemicals, just in different orders. Coal formation, as I just mentioned, is when plant material is trapped under layers of sediment. Oil and gas was the remains of sea creatures. So plankton is a type of sea creature. Where that dies, falls to the bottom and gets compressed. Limestone comes from shells and skeletons of marine organisms that are made from that calcium carbonate. And dissolving in oceans, solubility of carbon dioxide increases as the temperature drops. Okay. Then you were asked to draw or type 2 things you've learned so far. So we've covered the early atmosphere, the current atmosphere. We've discussed processes that change the gas amounts, and we've talked about how volcanoes led to plants, which then led to animals. So the changing gases has allowed the evolution from these different sort of steps. And you were asked to watch this video clip and to make notes to help you with these exam questions. So looking at the table of results. So in an exam, if they give you a table of information, it's usually because you have to use it to get the answer. So in the Earth's atmosphere today, the main gas is, so if you look at Earth today, the biggest number is nitrogen at 78%. In the Earth's atmosphere billions of years ago, the main gas was, so if we look at down there, so they think Venus is like the early atmosphere. So if we look down, 96.5% carbon dioxide. Scientists do not know the accurate composition of the Earth's early atmosphere. Suggest why. So we've mentioned it repeatedly. There's no direct evidence. Scientists and humans had not evolved yet, and it was just too long ago to have any evidence from. So back to this table, use information from the table. Suggest why there is no water on the surface of Venus. So if you look down the Venus column, you can see the average surface temperature is 460 degrees Celsius. That means any water would have boiled away because water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Describe what has happened to the carbon dioxide in the Earth's early atmosphere. Use the diagram to help you. So you need to mention things that are on the diagram. So if we work from the top left down, the first thing we can see is some trees. And there's an arrow of carbon dioxide pointing in and an arrow of oxygen pointing out. So step 1 that caused this change, plants did photosynthesis. Okay, moving further along the diagram, we can see there's an ocean. So we know that some carbon dioxide dissolved in the ocean and then became shells or skeletons of marine organisms. And if we look down at the bottom, we can see that there is some limestone and some oil, so fossil fuels. So we know that some of the carbon that was taken, or some of that carbon dioxide that was used to form limestone, calcium carbonate, or the sea creatures that had used it to make their shells or locked it up as part of carbon in their body had died and become a fossil fuel. This question is about life, the Earth, and the atmosphere. There are many theories. Suggest one reason why there are many theories. And this all comes back to there being no firm evidence or proof because it was such a long time ago. A 6-mark question where a fair few people skipped this question, but it's exactly the same things as we've been discussing. Describe and explain how the surface of the early Earth and its atmosphere have changed. So what was it like and what has it changed to? So if we think about the main gases, oxygen, carbon dioxide, water vapor, and nitrogen, which we have lots of now, what happened? What were they like? What are they like now? And how did they change? So oxygen has increased because plants developed and used carbon dioxide for photosynthesis and produced oxygen. Carbon dioxide also decreased because of this. Carbon dioxide also decreased because oceans formed and dissolved or absorbed carbon dioxide, which then became shells, skeletons, limestone, sedimentary rocks, or fossil fuels. Water vapor decreased because the water vapor cooled to form oceans. As the surface of the Earth cooled, that vapor, that gas became a liquid. As the Earth cooled, continents formed and the number of volcanoes reduced. So volcanic gases were reduced in the atmosphere. And nitrogen has increased because oxygen reacted with ammonia, which originally came from those volcanoes, and produced this nitrogen gas. So the more oxygen there was, the more reactions with ammonia and the more nitrogen would be produced. Looking at this bar chart, state 3 ways the atmosphere has changed or is different from that on Mars. So Mars has got 80 or 90% carbon dioxide, and we've got less carbon dioxide, 1% now. Okay, nitrogen, they've got 5%, and we've got 78 to 80%. And the other gases, they've got less than 5% of other gases, and we've got more. We've got oxygen, approximately 20 to 21%. The atmosphere on Earth may once have been like that on Mars. The evolution of green plants has changed the atmosphere. Explain why. So 2 things that we've mentioned. They remove carbon dioxide and release oxygen through photosynthesis. And then some of the carbon in the plants, which came from carbon dioxide, was trapped. And when the plants died, they formed sedimentary rocks or fossil fuels. When we got to the end, you should be happy and smiley. I know we've gone through this quite quickly, but based on how few of you emailed me for any help, I would have hoped that most of us were towards the smiley face end of this. Thank you for your hard work, keeping going. I know it's not ideal. I look forward, though, to seeing you still in those live lessons on Mondays, and I will make your next video tomorrow.